The summer heat hung low over Houston, Texas, on May 20th, 2024. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, traffic on I-69 crawling under a yellow sky, people in suits and scrub tops rushing past the bronze statues in front of the Harris County Civil Courthouse. But something broke the monotony that morning, something quiet, yet thunderous in its meaning. A man stood at the base of the courthouse steps, alone, holding a wooden cross in both hands. It wasn't ornate, just a simple, sanded beam about 3 feet high. Its edges were worn smooth by time, and a small brass plaque at the center bore only 2 words: "He lives." The man was Joel Osteen. No crowds, no press conference, just him, in a blue shirt and black slacks, silent before the building where so many verdicts are read and futures reshaped. A few people recognized him. Some whispered. A few pulled out phones. But Joel didn't speak. He only held the cross as still as a statue as traffic moved behind him and the courthouse loomed above. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. A sheriff's deputy approached. "Pastor Osteen," the deputy said carefully, "we're going to need you to move. This is public property, and you're making a religious display without a permit." Joel turned his eyes up slowly, calm, kind. "I'm not here to protest," he said gently. "I'm here to pray." "It's still considered a demonstration, sir. Courthouse regulations require written approval." Joel nodded slightly. "I understand. But this cross isn't making a statement. It's offering a question." The deputy hesitated. "Sir, if you don't leave, I'm required to issue a citation." "I won't resist," Joel said, lifting the cross and stepping down onto the sidewalk. "But I won't hide him either." That moment, so quiet, so unsensational, would ripple across Texas like wildfire. Within an hour, footage of Joel standing with the cross had spread through social media. By evening, local news outlets were replaying the scene. Some called it inspiring. Others accused him of seeking attention. But it was the next morning that the real storm began. The citation Joel received listed a fine of $1,000 for unauthorized public demonstration on county property. Most thought it would be quietly dismissed, but instead, the county judge scheduled a public hearing, one that would unknowingly become a flashpoint in the national conversation about faith, freedom, and the cross itself. Joel's church, Lakewood, issued a statement. Pastor Osteen was engaging in a private act of prayer. "We believe this matter will be resolved in accordance with both law and conscience." But the court had a different view. And as word spread, so did the questions. Why was he really there? Why that day? And why say nothing? The answers, true, simple and deeply human, would not come until much later. But already curiosity burned. If you're moved by stories where faith meets the real world, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss a chapter. The journey ahead may just change how you see the cross forever. The letter arrived on pale blue stationery, bearing the seal of the Harris County Courthouse. Joel opened it slowly, seated at his modest home desk. Not the office at Lakewood, but his study at home, where a worn Bible sat open and a mug of cold coffee rested on a coaster made by his daughter years ago. The language was formal, but the message was simple. He was summoned. The charge was listed plainly. Violation of Code 5.103, unauthorized religious display on government property. A $1,000 fine with an option to contest in person. The court date was set for June 3rd. Just 2 weeks away. Joel sighed, folded the letter, and looked out the window. His backyard was still and green, birds moving between feeders. But his heart was unsettled, not angry, not afraid, just searching. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the media. Instead, that night, he called Ruth. Ruth Maynard had been Joel's Sunday school teacher in the early 1970s at Humble, First Assembly of God. She was 89 now, still living in the same one-story brick house in Pasadena, Texas, where she kept a fridge covered in missionary prayer cards and a Bible beside every phone. "Joel?" she answered after one ring, her voice soft as ever. "I need some wisdom," he said. "Then you're asking the wrong person," she chuckled. "But go on." He told her everything, the courthouse, the citation, the cross, and the hearing. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I remember when your daddy used to bring that same cross into hospitals, that little one with the brass plaque. He'd hold it while he prayed over cancer patients." Joel swallowed. He had almost forgotten that. His father, John Osteen, had built that cross himself in 1975. "Don't go in there trying to be a symbol," Ruth said gently. "Let the cross speak for itself." He nodded, even though she couldn't see. Over the next week, the media picked up the story. Not just local outlets now, but national ones. The headlines varied. Joel Osteen fined for public display of cross, freedom of religion or violation of law. Pastor's silent prayer sparks legal battle. At church, members were divided. Some urged him to fight. Others thought he should pay the fine and move on. Joel listened, but spoke little. On the Sunday before the hearing, he stood before his congregation and gave a sermon titled "The Still Voice." He didn't mention the citation. He didn't mention the courthouse. But he did say this: "Sometimes, when the world is loud, the cross must be silent. But even in silence it speaks, and when it speaks it breaks chains." No one left that service unmoved, and yet questions persisted. Why that cross? Why that courthouse? Why that day? Only Joel knew the real reason, but even he wasn't ready to say it aloud. Not yet. The hearing was approaching, and behind the scenes people were preparing arguments, collecting video footage and sharpening opinions. But Joel? He was preparing his heart. This story is just beginning to unfold. If you believe that faith and truth deserve to be heard, subscribe to the channel and follow each chapter as it comes. What's coming next will stir something deep inside you. June 3rd, 2024 began quietly. There were no protesters outside the Harris County Courthouse, no reporters shoving microphones through a crowd. The morning air was already heavy with heat, but the streets were calm. Joel arrived alone. He wore a dark gray suit, a white shirt open at the collar. No tie. In one hand he carried a folder, in the other, the cross. Security at the door hesitated. One of the guards whispered, "You're really bringing that in?" Joel nodded. "It's part of my testimony." They let him through. Courtroom 11B was modest. Fluorescent lights, rows of wooden benches, a bench for the judge, and a raised Texas flag hanging near the seal. A few people were already seated, mostly legal aides and court staff. No cameras were allowed. Joel sat near the front, setting the cross gently on the floor beside him. It leaned against his seat like an old friend. Then came the sound of doors, opening behind him. Not press or angry citizens, but familiar faces, quiet ones. There was Martha Jones, who had taught vacation Bible school with Joel's mother back in the 1980s. She shuffled in with a walker and sat near the back. Then came Ramon de Leon, a former Lakewood janitor whose cancer Joel had prayed over in 2009. Others followed, people from neighborhoods across Houston. No slogans, no signs, just presence. By 9 a.m., the courtroom was nearly full. The presiding judge was Honorable Frances Kellerman, appointed in 2022. Known for her firm, no-nonsense approach to constitutional law, she'd handled high-profile, religious liberty cases before. As she entered, the courtroom stood. "Be seated," she said, adjusting her glasses and eyeing the docket. "We're here for Case 24-CV-357, State of Texas versus Joel Scott Osteen." The county attorney stood. "Your Honor, the state's position is simple. Mr. Osteen knowingly engaged in an unauthorized religious demonstration on county property. While we support freedom of belief, we also have clear regulations. Those were violated." The judge turned to Joel. "Mr. Osteen, do you have legal representation?" "No, Your Honor, I'll be speaking for myself." She nodded once. "Proceed." Joel stood slowly. He didn't carry a speech, no papers in hand, just the cross, which he placed gently in front of him. "This cross belonged to my father," he began. He held it while praying for strangers. He brought it into hospitals, into prisons, into homes broken by addiction and grief. "On May 20th, I carried it to the courthouse steps, not to protest, but to remember." He paused, meeting the judge's eyes. "I didn't speak. I didn't hold a sign. I didn't shout. I just stood and prayed for our judges, our leaders, our laws, and our people." There was a stillness in the room that words couldn't explain. I didn't ask for attention. I didn't plan a movement. I just needed to be close to the one I follow, Jesus Christ. The judge leaned forward. Why the courthouse? Why that day? Joel hesitated. The real answer was one he hadn't spoken aloud. Not to Ruth, not to anyone, but not yet. The judge took a slow breath and folded her hands. Mr. Osteen, she said, this courtroom doesn't try matters of faith. We uphold laws, but sometimes those two things cross paths. You've explained your action. The question before us now is whether it violated a statute. Joel nodded. The county attorney rose. Your Honor, we acknowledge that Mr. Osteen's behavior was peaceful, but the law is clear. He displayed a religious symbol on county property without a permit. Intent doesn't erase that fact. Judge Kellerman tapped her pen thoughtfully. I'll allow one witness from each side, she said. Mr. Osteen, do you have someone you'd like to call? He paused, then quietly said, Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to call Miss Martha Jones. Gasps were heard from the back. Martha stood slowly, leaning on her walker. As two attendants helped her forward, she took the witness chair, the wooden seat too hard for someone her age, but she didn't complain. Please state your name and your relationship to the defendant, the clerk said. Martha Louise Jones. I taught him Sunday school when he was 9, and I've prayed for him every day since. A gentle smile spread through the room. Joel asked softly, Miss Martha, what does this cross mean to you? She reached out a wrinkled hand and touched the top of the wooden beam beside the witness stand. It means mercy, she said. It means that no matter where you are, even outside a courthouse, you're not alone. Tears welled in her eyes. I remember when Joel's daddy would bring this very cross into hospital rooms. No camera, no stage, just quiet hope. That's what Joel was doing, reminding this city of hope. The judge leaned forward. Miss Jones, do you believe this act disrupted the courthouse or disrespected the law? Martha looked up, firm and clear. No, ma'am, it was the most respectful thing I've ever seen. The courtroom was utterly silent. The county attorney stood but chose not to cross-examine. Outside, clouds began gathering. A June storm threatened to break the heat. Inside, something else was gathering. Tension and perhaps conviction. The judge turned to Joel. You still haven't answered why you chose May 20th. Why that specific date? Joel's gaze dropped. His hand touched the cross, Your Honor, he said slowly. I'll answer that tomorrow. I ask only for one more day. A murmur passed through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow, then nodded once. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Outside the courthouse, reporters had finally gathered, waiting, but Joel said nothing. He walked straight through them, holding the cross like a shepherd's staff. The real reason for that day, for that quiet prayer, was closer now, but still hidden. The silence will soon break. If this story has stirred your heart, subscribe now. The truth behind Joel's decision will be revealed, and it may leave you speechless. The next morning, June 4th, the sky over Houston was gray with low clouds. Light rain fell as Joel Osteen stepped out of his car in the courthouse parking lot. He carried no umbrella, only the cross again in his hand held close, not as a symbol but as something deeply personal. Inside courtroom 11B, the seats filled even faster than the day before. People came not just for legal reasons now, but because word had spread that Joel would finally reveal why he had stood silently on those courthouse steps. At 10:02 a.m., Judge Kellerman entered. She looked more somber today. Mr. Osteen, she said, yesterday you requested an extension to explain the significance of May 20th. You now have the floor. Joel stood, holding the cross in front of him, his voice quieter than before. I didn't expect to speak today, he began. But I think I need to. He looked toward the ceiling, as if searching for help. On May 20th, 2023, he said, 1 year before the day I stood outside this courthouse, I visited Memorial Hermann Hospital, not as a pastor, but as a father. A hushed murmur moved across the courtroom. My son Jonathan had been admitted 2 days earlier, after suffering a cardiac episode. The doctors told us it wasn't life-threatening, but something in me, something only a father would understand, knew otherwise. He paused, the courtroom breathless. At 2:17 a.m. on May 20th, he went into a cardiac arrest. They tried everything, but God took him home. Gasps and stunned silence followed. Some hands rose to mouths, some heads lowered in reverence. Until that moment, no one knew. Joel and his family had kept the loss private. No statement, no memorial, no press. That cross, he said, placing it gently in front of the bench, was with me that night. I sat with it in the hospital chapel while machines beeped and hope slipped away. His voice broke slightly, but he didn't stop. I went back to the courthouse 1 year later, not to make a scene, but to stand where law and loss intersect. To pray for families who lose sons, for fathers who must walk out of hospitals with empty hands, and for judges who bear the weight of every decision. He turned to Judge Kellerman. Your Honor, I didn't break the law with rebellion in my heart. I stood with grief in my chest. I didn't speak because sometimes pain has no words. No one moved, not even the judge. Joel finished quietly. I'll pay the fine if you ask me to. But I needed someone to know why I stood. The judge stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes blinked slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then she looked down at the bench. We'll reconvene this afternoon for my ruling, she said, her voice soft. The gavel struck, but the silence in the room lingered. Outside, the rain picked up. Some stayed seated, unsure whether to speak or pray. And Joel? He sat beside the cross once more. The courtroom reconvened at 3:00 p.m. sharp. This time the air was different, heavy, not because of the legal tension, but because grief had entered the room and settled like dust on every surface. Judge Frances Kellerman returned to the bench without her usual folder of notes. She brought only a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, tucked beneath her arm. Court is in session, she said, then looked up directly at Joel. Mr. Osteen, thank you for your honesty this morning. The court offers its deepest condolences for your loss. Joel nodded once, grateful. A quiet murmur of amen passed through the back row. The judge unfolded the paper slowly. This case presented an unusual circumstance. On its face, it appears straightforward, a public religious display without a permit, but the spirit of the law, like scripture, requires context. She looked out over the courtroom. This court recognizes that Mr. Osteen's action was neither disruptive nor inflammatory. There was no signage, no amplification, no crowd incitement. It was a single act of silent prayer. She paused. Therefore, while technically the code was violated, the context transforms its meaning. The court finds Mr. Osteen in technical violation, but the fine of $1,000 is waived in full due to the mitigating circumstances presented. The courtroom didn't erupt. It simply exhaled. Joel closed his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his hand. He only placed his hand over his heart and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Judge Kellerman wasn't finished. Furthermore, she added, this court recommends the county review the language in Code 5.103. A law meant to prevent disruption should not unintentionally silence the grieving. We must make space for dignity, even outside our walls. For the first time in her career, a single tear slipped down her cheek. The gavel fell. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but this time the mood was quieter, more respectful. Joel stepped to the podium set up near the steps. The cross was still in his hand. I didn't come here to win, he told the microphones. I came to remember, and to pray that those who hurt in silence might be seen. One reporter called out, "Will you speak at churches about this?" Joel looked out over the crowd and said simply, "No, I'll keep doing what I've always done, listen, pray, and carry the cross. Not to prove anything, but because it still saves broken hearts." That night, news anchors used words like grace, dignity, and mercy, not the typical language for legal coverage. But something about the case had softened even the hardest voices. Baccaor. Home, Joel sat alone on the porch, watching the last of the rain fall through the porch light. He thought of Jonathan. He thought of Martha Jones. And he thought of the hundreds of people across Texas now carrying silent grief of their own. The cross, for now, rested beside the door, but its message had gone far beyond the wood it was carved. From 4 days after the ruling, Joel returned to Lakewood Church. He didn't mention the court case during his Sunday message. He didn't need to. People could see it in his eyes. He had walked through a valley most never see from a pulpit. That afternoon, back in his office, Ruth handed him a stack of letters. "These came in since the ruling," she said. "People from all over Texas. Some from other states, too." Joel sifted through envelopes in careful silence. Most bore handwriting. Many included scripture verses on the back. One in particular caught his eye. A plain white envelope postmarked Lubbock, Texas. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. No return name. "Pastor Joel, my daughter died last year, May 20th. I hadn't heard about your son until this week. I never talk about these things, and I haven't set foot in a church since the funeral. But when I saw what you did, standing in silence, holding that cross, I cried for the first time in months. You reminded me that someone else remembers that. Date 2, I just wanted to say thank you. That's all." A hurting dad in Lubbock. Joel folded the letter gently, holding it as if it might tear under the weight of what it carried. He didn't know who the man was, or whether he would ever write again. But for Joel, that single note meant more than any legal vindication. Later that evening, Joel stood in Lakewood's empty sanctuary. The lights dimmed. He placed the letter at the foot of the cross near the pulpit. He whispered, "You're not alone, brother." That night, Ruth sat beside him on the porch as the Texas breeze moved through the trees. "You okay?" she asked. Joel nodded. "I am. But something's shifting. This wasn't just about me." Ruth didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand and said, "People are watching, Joel. They want to know if faith can really carry." Then, when there's no answer, he looked toward the horizon. "Then I'll carry the cross wherever it's needed." Word spread, slowly but deeply, not through viral videos or headlines, but in quiet circles. Grieving mothers, retired veterans, nurses, truck drivers, small-town pastors, people who had buried loved ones and had no words for their pain. They began writing to Joel, not to praise but to share. And Joel read every word. Some days he drove across counties just to sit with someone who had lost a child or a spouse. He didn't preach. He didn't bring a camera. He brought the same wooden cross and silence, and somehow that was enough. 2 weeks after the ruling, Joel sat on a weathered bench in Eleanor Tinsley Park. It was early morning. The Houston skyline loomed above, wrapped in haze. The wooden cross rested beside him, worn and familiar. He'd brought it with him that morning, not for a sermon, not for a show, but because he didn't know where else to be. A woman approached slowly, pushing a stroller. She was older, 60, maybe 70, with silver curls and a faint limp. She paused near the bench but said nothing. Joel offered a gentle nod. After a moment, she sat down beside him. "I know who you are," she said, not unkindly. Joel turned to her. "Then I should probably know your name." "Doris," she replied. "I lost my son to cancer. May 20th, 2016. He didn't speak. He just listened. She looked at the cross beside him. "I watched the footage from the courthouse. You didn't say a word. That meant something." Joel finally asked, "What did it mean to you?" Doris took a long breath. That it's okay not to have answers. That silence doesn't mean God's absent. They sat in silence together for a time. Then Doris reached into the stroller, not for a baby, but for a photograph in a zippered pouch. It was a young man in a military uniform, his smile broad, his eyes clear. "This is my James," she said. He was 31. Joel looked at the picture for a long time. Then he whispered, "He looks like a good man." "He was," she said. Doris stood up slowly. "Thank you for sitting here. Sometimes we just need someone who understands." Joel nodded. "You're always welcome here, or at Lakewood if you feel like coming." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. Not sure I'm ready for churches again, but I'm glad I sat here today." As she walked away, Joel looked out across the water. He realized then the quiet places mattered just as much as the platform, perhaps more. The bench in the park, the hospital chapel, the cold courthouse steps. These were sacred spaces, even if no one else knew it. That night he added a new page to the leather notebook he'd started keeping, names and dates of those he'd met on this quiet journey. Beneath today's entry, he wrote, Doris James, May 20th, 2016. A cross doesn't always need a pulpit. Sometimes a park bench is enough. In the stillness of his study, Joel prayed not for sermons or crowds, but for the next person who would sit beside him, and he prayed they would feel heard. It was mid-July when the letter came, handwritten, with neat cursive and a return address in Tyler, Texas. Joel sat at his kitchen table, coffee untouched, the cross leaning against the nearby wall. He unfolded the note slowly. Dear Pastor Joel, I pastor a small congregation just outside Tyler. No stage lights, no broadcast, just a dozen or so folks and the scriptures. We watched your court case unfold, but more than that, we watched what came after. Your silence meant more than most sermons I've heard. We've had 5 funerals this year, 3 were children. Our people are tired. They're still showing up, but their hearts are breaking. Would you consider visiting us? Not to preach, just to sit, to pray, maybe to carry that cross a little farther. Pastor Alan Briggs, Good Shepherd Bible Church. Tyler, TX Joel read the letter 3 times. Then he picked up the phone. 2 days later, he arrived in Tyler. The church was a white paneled building off a dusty back road. The lot wasn't paved. The bell on the roof didn't work. But the sanctuary smelled of wood and hymnals, something almost holy in its simplicity. Pastor Briggs was in his 60s, with a soft voice and tired eyes. He greeted Joel with a quiet handshake and a long, understanding look. No one here expects anything grand, he said. They just want to know God hasn't forgotten them. Joel nodded. I think I came to know the same. They sat together in the sanctuary that night with 10 church members. No microphone, no service bulletin, just a circle of folding chairs and the cross leaning in the center. One woman, her voice shaking, spoke of losing her grandson to a drowning accident. Another man said his wife passed from a stroke during service just weeks prior. A third whispered about his son's suicide and how shame had kept him from speaking until now. Joel didn't interrupt. He didn't teach. When he did speak, it was only to say, I'm so sorry. God is with you. And somehow that was enough. After 2 hours, no one wanted to leave. There were tears, soft prayers, even laughter, brief but real. As Joel returned to his car that night, Pastor Briggs walked beside him. You know, Alan said, we keep thinking we need answers, but maybe we just need someone willing to sit with the question. Joel looked up at the stars. Then maybe this is what the cross is for now. And the journey continued. It was a Tuesday afternoon, in late July, when Joel stopped at a truck stop just outside Waco. He was returning from East Texas, tired but not in a rush. The cross lay gently across the back seat, wrapped in a blanket to protect it from the sun. He wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans and a faded blue shirt. No cameras, no staff, just a man, weary but listening. Inside the diner, the waitress recognized him. She brought him coffee without asking. Saw you on the news, she said with a warm smile. My daddy said you reminded him of his pastor from the 60s. Joel smiled. Tell him I take that as a high compliment. At the booth behind him, a trucker in his mid-50s was finishing a late lunch. He wore a Houston Astros cap and an oil-stained denim jacket. He stood to leave, but paused beside Joel's table. You're the preacher from the courthouse, ain't you? Joel nodded. Yes, sir, Joel. The man extended a hand. Rick, I don't do church much, but I saw what you did, and I felt something I hadn't in a long while. Joel motioned to the seat across from him. Sit a minute. Rick hesitated, then sat. My boy Caleb, he said. He was 17. Drunk driver hit him just before graduation. I haven't prayed since the funeral. Joel listened quietly. But when I saw you standing with that cross and not saying a word, it was like something broke open, like someone finally got it. Rick's voice cracked, and he looked away, embarrassed. I thought I was the only one carrying this weight. Joel leaned forward. You're not. Not by a long shot. They talked for almost an hour, about grief, guilt, God. Rick never quoted scripture, but he didn't need to. His heart was full of psalms that hadn't yet found words. Before leaving, Rick asked quietly, You think I could see that cross? They walked outside to Joel's car. Joel gently pulled back the blanket and let Rick touch the wood. Rick didn't say anything. He just stood with his hand resting on it, his eyes closed, a single tear sliding down his weathered face. Joel didn't speak either. When Rick finally opened his eyes, he whispered, "Thank you for not letting people forget." As the trucker pulled away, Joel stood beside the car for a long time. Not because of the heat or the time, but because moments like that don't happen often, and when they do, you don't rush them. Joel had begun to expect letters, handwritten notes, quiet, testimonies left at the church door. But the email that reached him late one evening caught him off guard, not for its content, but for who had sent it. It came from Maria Velasquez, a city employee from San Antonio, and it was titled, "We Were Wrong. Dear Pastor Osteen, I work in the public relations office here in San Antonio. Months ago, I approved a legal notice discouraging unregistered public religious displays. At the time, it seemed routine. I never imagined it would result in what happened to you. After watching the courtroom footage and following the response across Texas, I realized how out of touch we've become. What you did wasn't political. It wasn't performative. It was grief, and grief doesn't need a permit. I've begun discussions with my department to amend our city policy, allowing for peaceful personal displays of religious symbols, especially in mourning. Your cross wasn't disruptive. It was healing. I'm sorry, and I thank you. Maria Velasquez, Office of Community Standards, San Antonio." Text. Joel sat still for a long time after reading it. In a world so often bound by bureaucracy, this message came as a miracle of sorts. Not because it changed the law overnight, but because someone inside the system had felt something real and acted on it. Later that week, Joel drove to San Antonio quietly. No announcements, no church service. He walked through Market Square, with the cross slung gently over his shoulder. He wasn't making a statement. He was simply walking in prayer. People stopped him, not to ask questions, but to nod, to touch the cross. One woman, wiping tears, simply said, "Thank you for remembering those we've lost." Joel didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, he met Maria briefly in her office. She was younger than he expected, barely in her 30s, but her face carried the seriousness of someone who had seen too much loss too. "Soon, you changed more than a law," she told him. "You reminded us what compassion looks like." Joel said nothing. He simply shook her hand and said, "Keep going. People are watching." The cross went back into his car, and the road continued. It was late August when Joel visited the Fort Worth County Fair. He hadn't planned to go, he rarely did anymore, but a small church near the fairgrounds had invited him to stop by their booth. They were collecting donations for grieving families. He wore no name tag. No bodyguard followed him. Still, word had spread quietly through town. The pastor with the cross might come. The sun was setting when Joel arrived, the air thick with fried dough and distant carousel music. He carried the cross lightly, tucked under one arm. It had become more than wood by now. It carried stories, names, burdens. At the far end of the fairgrounds, near a row of veterans' support tents, a man in a wheelchair was watching Joel approach. The man raised his hand. "Pastor, I know you." Joel nodded and walked over. "Name's Thomas," the man said. "Sergeant First Class, retired, lost my legs in Iraq, but I didn't lose my son until he came home." Joel sat beside him, quiet. He made it back. "Pastor?" "Hole on the outside." But something inside never came with him. He ended his life last December, in our garage. Christmas lights still up. Joel swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry." Thomas looked at the cross. "I saw what you did on the courthouse steps. My chaplain sent me the video. I couldn't explain it, but I watched it 10 times. Joel asked softly, "Why?" "Because," Thomas said, eyes welling, "you were standing for people like him, like me, like the ones who come home and still can't find peace." They sat there as the sky turned orange, and Joel felt a quiet honor settling in his chest. No awards, no flags. Just one man sharing his deepest pain on a folding chair at a fairground. Before Joel left, Thomas asked to touch the cross. He placed his hands gently on the beam, closing his eyes. This is more than a symbol now, he whispered. It's a bridge for those of us who can't find the words. Joel nodded. That's what it's become for me, too. As he left the fair that evening, a dozen others had gathered silently around Thomas. No one said much, but there was a stillness there that only God could orchestrate. By early September, Joel had returned to Lakewood Church, not to preach, but to sit. That Sunday, he entered through the side door just before the service began, carrying the cross, as always. The congregation stood to sing, but Joel made his way to the very back pew unnoticed by most. He didn't want the spotlight, he just wanted to listen. In front of him sat a woman in her 70s with thinning white hair and a small notebook on her lap. She didn't sing, she didn't look up. She simply sat with her hands folded and her eyes closed. After the service, as people trickled out and the music faded, Joel remained. So did she. Eventually, she turned around. "I know you," she said softly. Joel smiled. "I think a lot of people do these days." She nodded. "I lost my husband 3 months ago. 52 years married. Every Sunday we sat right here. When he passed, I promised myself I wouldn't move seats." Joel looked around the nearly empty sanctuary. "That's a long time to love someone," she smiled faintly. "We were just kids when we met. He proposed under an oak tree in Brenham. Never bought a fancy ring, just loved me real and steady." She tapped the notebook on her lap. "This is my grief journal. Every week I come here and write to him. I don't know if he hears it, but I believe God does." Joel asked gently, "Would you like me to pray with you?" She hesitated, then said, "Only if you let me pray for you too." He nodded. In the stillness of the sanctuary, 2 strangers bowed their heads. Her prayer came first, simple, heartfelt, words for strength and peace. Then Joel spoke, asking God to carry her gently through the long, quiet days ahead. When they opened their eyes, she said, "You've been carrying that cross for all of us, haven't you?" Joel looked down at the wooden beam beside him. "Trying to, but I think some of you have been carrying me too." She reached out and touched the edge of the cross. "Then maybe we'll carry it together, just a little longer." As Joel walked out that day, he paused at the back pew one last time. So many sat there every Sunday. Some are broken, some are tired, some prayed with all they had left. He knew now it was the silent pews that mattered most. It was a grey Friday morning when she came. Joel was at the church early, organizing boxes of letters that had been arriving daily. He'd read every one. They came from across Texas, some from nursing homes, others from prisons. Some were from teenagers. A few were from the dying. At around 9:15, his secretary buzzed in. "Sir, there's a young woman here to see you, says she's a reporter." Joel sighed. He'd been cautious with media since the courthouse. Most wanted a soundbite, not a story. But something in the secretary's voice made him say, "Let her in." The reporter was in her early 30s, hair tied back, notepad tucked under her arm. She introduced herself as Naomi Kent, a religion correspondent from the Texas Tribune. "I don't want an interview," she said quickly. "I just want to understand." Joel raised an eyebrow. "Understand what?" "Why you didn't fight back," she said. "You could have made this political. You could have launched a campaign. But you didn't." Joel gestured to the seat across from him. "Have you ever lost someone you couldn't save?" Naomi nodded slowly. "My father? Last spring. Pancreatic cancer." "And did you want to shout? Demand answers?" She paused. "I wanted to burn the whole hospital down." Joel smiled gently. "Me too, but instead I stood quietly, holding a cross." She didn't write anything down. She just listened. Joel continued. "We think silence means weakness, but sometimes silence is the only language grief understands." Naomi leaned forward. "People think you're changing Texas." "I'm not," Joel said. "I'm just carrying something visible. What they feel most can't show." She was quiet for a long time, then she asked, "Can I see it, the cross?" He brought it in, scratched, worn, no longer smooth. She reached out and touched the grain. "It looks heavier than I imagined," Joel said. "Not as heavy as what people are carrying inside." Naomi stood. "I don't think I'll write this story," she said. "Some things shouldn't be reduced to headlines," he nodded. "Then maybe just carry it forward in your own way." As she walked out, Joel felt no need to follow. He knew the story had been told, not on paper, but in the heart. It was a calm, golden morning in October when Joel returned to the courthouse, not for a protest, not to carry the cross, but to appear before the judge who'd fined him 3 months earlier. The city had called a review hearing, an opportunity to revisit the fine now that public response had shifted, but Joel hadn't come to contest. The courtroom was smaller this time, fewer cameras, no signs. Just Joel, his lawyer, and a handful of observers, many of them silent supporters who had followed the journey closely. Judge Marianne Blake, a woman known for her restraint and discipline, entered the chamber with the same neutral expression she'd worn in the first hearing. "We are here to revisit the matter of Mr. Joel Osteen's citation for unauthorized public religious expression. On courthouse property," she read aloud. "Mr. Osteen, do you wish to make a final statement?" Joel stood, not behind a podium, just beside the bench. "I don't ask for the fine to be removed," he said. "I came here to carry something heavier than a wooden cross. I came to carry stories of the broken-hearted, the grieving, the unseen, and I'll carry that cost if it means those voices were heard." The courtroom was utterly still. I meant to challenge the law," Joel added. "I meant to bear witness to the pain this country carries quietly, that's all." Judge Blake looked down at the papers in front of her. Then she did something no one expected. She removed her glasses, folded her hands and said, "Pastor Osteen, I lost my son to suicide in 2018. I've never spoken of it in court. Until now." The room froze. "I watched your silence that day," she continued, "and for the first time in years I felt like someone saw me. Not the judge, not the professional, just the mother." Her voice trembled. "I can't change the past, but I can acknowledge the truth. Your actions brought healing, not harm." She then declared the fine formally waived. A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. Joel did not raise his hands. He did not shout. He bowed his head and whispered, "Only one word, amen." After the hearing, as he stepped outside, a small group had gathered, widows, veterans, teenagers, strangers. No one asked for photos. No one demanded a speech. Instead, one woman approached him with a tiny cross made of twigs and thread. "But all carry something," she said, placing it in his hand. Joel nodded. "But now we know we don't carry it alone." He walked home that afternoon, not as a celebrity, not as a martyr, but as a man who had quietly helped a state remember its soul.